Hello, everyone. I'm Michelle Versteeg, VP Marketing with Cardinal Path. Welcome to the second annual Analytics Rising virtual event. This event has drawn thousands of marketing analytics professionals to lean into some of the biggest challenges and tried and tested solutions in our space. There's always so much marketing news and information to sort through. And so this year, we decided to focus on just 3 topics that we at Cardinal Path believe to be absolutely essential in shaping an organization's marketing analytics capabilities. This session, entitled Gearing Up for a Cookieless Future, is a particularly hot topic. We're hearing concerns from marketing leaders around how to plan for the inevitable disappearance of cookies, the newest data privacy regulations, and how to stand up the right mix of marketing technology, governance, and digital strategy to compete and win in this new era. Today, you'll get a handle on exactly what's happening with third-party tracking cookies, why it's happening, and most importantly, what you can and should do about it. So before we get started, I have a couple of housekeeping items to cover. First, this session is being recorded. A link to the recording of all 3 Analytics Rising sessions will be sent to you after today's event. We have allowed time for questions, so please send them in to us as you think of them. Just use the Q&A panel on your screen to submit, and we'll address these towards the end of the presentation. And even if we don't have time to address your question live on the webinar, we'll be sure to follow up with you directly by email. It's an honor to introduce our 2 speakers. Alex Langsher is the co-CEO of Cardinal Path, a well-known thought leader, author, and digital marketing evangelist. He's got a unique ability to turn complex analytics concepts into actions that lead to obvious business value. And for this reason, Alex is routinely called upon by CMOs, CEOs, and boards of Fortune 1000 brands to help them navigate the world of data-driven marketing. Hi, Alex.
Hello, Michelle. Great to be here.
And Mary Andrews is a group director on Cardinal Path's Analysis and Insights team. She's been measuring and optimizing digital experiences for over a decade, and global brands count on Mary to craft custom solutions that uncover the true impact of marketing investments and plot a course to double down on high-value initiatives. Mary, it's wonderful to have you here today.
Thanks, Michelle.
So with that, I'll turn this session over to you, Alex.
Thanks very much, Michelle. So we're really excited today to talk about the death of cookies. It's a question that we're getting a lot from clients. I'm sure that many of you have been thinking about this as well. So the purpose of today is to kind of give everybody an overview about what really is happening about cookies and the major dislocation that that's going to create in the measurement space. Why we believe that this is going to really fuel the rise of identity and the value of identity as being the new gold, and how advertisers and marketers are really going to need to think about how they capture information to understand people uniquely. And then we'll end with some live Q&A if you have any questions. So we're looking forward to this session. So let's start off by getting into the death of cookies, which may be an overhyped word, or term, but we think that it's relevant. So let's just give everybody a short primer on cookies. So these were small bits of text that were placed on the browser by the server, and there are 2 types. So if you go to mydomain.com, or if you went to cardinalpath.com, we would set a cookie on your machine. That would be considered to be a first-party cookie set by us on your device. A third-party cookie is one that's set by some other entity. So for example, if we had ads, the ad server would set a cookie on the machine. So that's not from us, it's from some other third party. This whole kind of cookie infrastructure was never really meant to do what it is doing today. It's really been evolved into this place. And the key thing about this infrastructure is that cookies at no time never did identify people, and I think that's a well-known fact. So why are we at this point in time where we're hearing about the death of cookies? Let's just take a step back and look at things from a higher level. If we think about the data brokers and modelers, these are people that are going around right now and selling a lot of information about me to other people. A little story, I'm a hiker, avid hiker. I want to find a map. I went to a nonprofit organization. I went online. I went into their store. I looked at a bunch of maps. I selected one. The phone rang. The dog howled. I had to go. I had to leave. I didn't come back to that session. And a little while later, I received an email indicating that there was something still in my cart. And I had never identified myself in any way to that organization. This is a use of third-party data to identify, match me, and then target me. And it's one of the things that we feel has led to this rise of a kind of consumer recognition that things are not happening the way they should. And we see that right now if we look at the societal sphere. In intelligent tracking prevention that was launched by Safari, and which Mary will talk a bit more about. We're now at version 2.2, I believe. It came out a few years ago. We've seen the rise of ad blocking where people are saying, I don't want those ads, I don't want you to follow me, I don't want you to know about me. General rise in level of privacy. We're seeing the use of Tor browsers is skyrocketing. Small search firm called DuckDuckGo, which provides completely anonymous searching, is really rising. So we're seeing that industry is starting to protect user privacy. The channels, the walled gardens, are also getting involved. They're kind of saying, well, look, if you want to play in our space, we know who people are. We have a lot of information about those people, and you can use that information to target, but according to our terms. And all of this has been driving the legislative agenda. So we saw that in the European Union. The GDPR was announced a couple of years ago, was actually starting to be enforced. We're seeing some fines, not as much as we anticipated, but some fines have been going on. Even in the United States, the Department of Justice has fined Facebook $5 billion recently for misuse of data, which surprised a lot of us who didn't think that would happen under this Department of Justice. But we are now seeing at a lot of the states level the rise of different legislation that's designed to protect consumer privacy. And in fact, the CCPA in California, which we'll get to in a little while in more detail, is an example of that. So consumer trust writ large has been eroding, and the way that large tech has responded to that is different, but it's similar, and it's driving away the use of cookies.
And to that point about trust, Alex, because it's a really salient one, and I think that'll flow through the entirety of the conversation today. We as digital marketers, or a lot of the people in the room here who are digital marketers, we need to start thinking about consumer trust right at the top of the heap, and it's number one on this slide for a reason. But we also want to be mindful in how we're marketing. Think about the attention crisis that's going on in the economy at large right now, and the use of mobile devices and push messages and everything like that to gain our customers' attention. So being responsible is going to gain the trust that I think is going to be pivotal for us to be able to converse with our consumers in an ongoing fashion in this cookieless future that we're talking about.
Yeah, that's correct, Mary. And all of this means one thing, really, and that once we establish that trust, if we're able to collect data about individuals and manage that data personally, that first-party data, that becomes really central. It's, we're going to have consent attached to it, and we're going to focus a lot on first-party data and why we believe that it's the way of the future. Let's just take a little bit of a deeper dive on the government regulation. So we already know, as I mentioned before, that different states are regulating the United States. We're seeing a lot of talk about privacy, and it's here, it's now. For us, which is kind of really interesting, is the question is, where is it going to go? Right? So if you look at the platforms of some of the candidates, you'll see that there's talk like what we see on the right-hand side here, breaking up big tech. And again, it's this kind of sense that maybe they know too much, maybe they control too much. So we're going into a period of dislocation, and a lot of things are going to shift, and we think those shifts are going to happen rapidly. My personal concern is that anytime you make legislation quickly, it tends to be poor legislation. So hopefully things evolve in a way that takes everybody's points of view into account. But let's dive in a little bit and talk about intelligent tracking prevention.
So what's interesting here is going back to that idea of trust. So Apple has always put consumers really at the core of everything they do. Usability has been their number one mantra, and they also want to make sure that they have trust of their consumers, so not only on devices but within the browsers that they own. So I think, you know, Safari's ITP1 came out a few years ago, but really as digital marketers, we became aware of it about a year and a half ago with ITP 2.0's launch. And the reason we became aware is Apple was saying, you know, on Safari browsers, which by the way is still the number one browser on mobile devices, we're going to just block third-party cookies altogether. Like, there's no reason for Apple from a business perspective and to really need that information and to pass that through. consumers don't seem to know what it is or have, maybe have a little bit of anxiety about it. So we're just going to block it. Then moving forward now, by the way, actually, Alex.
Mary, that makes Apple look like the good guys, right? Because
yes,
exactly. Yeah.
They're not dummies. That's why they didn't get to where they are. And what's interesting, you just said about ITP, 2.3 just launched a couple days ago, and that's so beyond 2.0 to 2.123, every step of the way, Apple has made it more difficult for marketers to be able to track consumer behavior on the Safari browser. So what's really interesting is in the past year and a half, they are starting to sniff out, and I know a lot of marketers are really creative here. We're getting around some of the cross-domain tracking and maybe piggybacking a refer URL with it to their own site, first-party cookie, to be able to track a marketing from another channel. Apple's basically onto us and what's been happening, and they basically are saying, now, unless it's here at Direct Organic, you have a 7-day expiration window for your cookies, but anything with any kind of cross-domain, and they've been watching and sniffing out all the people that have, all the companies, I should say, domains that have been a party to this kind of cross-domain sharing of information. They're like basically saying, we're shutting you down. You get a 1-day expiration. So that is quite an impact from a measurement perspective across the board. And I think going a little bit deeper into how this impacts the big players in the browser space, and we can talk about this next, is up until ITP, we were able to pretty much track and measure fairly equivalently across the main browsers. But then as ITP came on, we see Apple's fading away. Firefox launched something similar. Now we're down to a far lesser pool of identifiable cookie-based users or even prospects that we can target or retarget or optimize measure against. So all of that has been happening in the past year and a half. Now you see Google with Chrome, they have some ideas around the same cookie prevention policies, and they're probably coming soon. But right now, where things stand today, Apple within their own ecosystem is still allowing this tracking, and they're benefiting from it because now there aren't as many players in the space, and CPAs as a result are going up.
Yeah, and I think it's important to kind of put on the table here is that it's been a bit of cat and mouse arms race game, right? So Apple's come out with a protocol, whatever it is, 1.x or 2.x or x.x. And advertisers have been responding, or tech industry has been responding, and then Apple's been responding, and then the tech industry has been responding. So there's been this kind of arms race, tug of war with approaches to tracking versus not. And right now there's a lot of talk around server-side tracking. And I guess what we just want to put on the table, we'll come back to this a little bit later on, is that if you're investing in any of these different approaches right now, it's difficult for us to assess how long those will work. And as a result, it might be a poor investment, or you might be halfway through it and something will shift on you. The general idea is that if too many people start doing it, it has any kind of blowback onto privacy, you can pretty much expect that the message is we're going to step on it and stop it. So we've really got to think different about this. Which brings us to this idea that I want to put on the table, and that is we're entering the age of we call the digital nonconformity at Cardinal Path. So the picture that you're looking at right now, I'm a geologist by training. This is the type locality where James Hutton back in the 18th century realized that the Earth must be really old because you have these rocks which have layers which are going vertically. They're overlain by rocks which are horizontally, so something must have happened to tilt them to get them vertically, and then something must have happened to have these other ones laid down horizontally, and that must be a really big gap of time between the two. So they call that an unconformity. And we think there's a similar one that's about to happen on digital and digital marketing, where everything that we were able to do pre-ITP and ETP, which is enhanced tracking prevention on Firefox, and post is going to be different. So all of and most of our clients are really wedded to their historical data. They're really wedded to year over year or quarter over quarter or even month over month. And what we're saying is that's going to be really problematic. And we need to understand that because, in fact, the slop in the data or the error in the data is accelerating right now, but it actually started a couple of years ago. So it's going to force us to really look at things differently and to measure different. So what are those impacts? Mary, you want to share?
Yeah, absolutely. So already the metrics, audiences, retargeting, as we've discussed, it's already happening. We are deeply in the midst of both the media optimization and measurement, I shouldn't say crisis, but a new place. There's opportunities that come out of this, obviously. So I don't want it to be all doom and gloom, but we're at a very strange point where we're trying to figure out what are the best ways to measure. How's that going to impact our potential for personalization? And this one is really interesting because it's where the legislation is somewhat at odds with what people want. People do want a personalized experience, and that's going to be harder in this new paradigm. We have a clear focus, and we'll talk about this throughout, about logins and getting first-party data, getting that data clean, consent-proof, and ready to leverage your own, I would call it a walled garden of your own data set, and we'll talk about that further as we go along. And then attribution. Attribution might be feeling some of the largest impacts, especially of the most recent blocking of third-party cookies. And I believe that there's even another session on attribution coming up after ours today, so stay tuned for that. But the impacts are far-reaching.
Yeah, and I think that if we just pause here for a second and just talk about all of this, and one of the impacts that I see is that top of funnel metrics are going to become, which were always very hard. I mean, display was always hard to understand the impact of display on an eventual sale because of time between and exposure and all those things. And it was made easier if you stuck within, let's say, for example, the Google ecosystem and you had a tool like GA360. That made it easier to get some view-throughs. But that's really going to be hard, right? So to be able to, if you're not able to keep data, if the cookies are being tossed out after 1 day or 7 days, and we know that the buyer cycle is, more than that, and maybe it's up to a month, anything that you've done at the top of funnel is going to be really, really hard to connect to conversion online. It already has been, but it's going to be much more so going forward. So that has to really be brought into account because we're now back in this situation of, well, we know that it works, but we don't know how much it works, and it's harder for us to assess, and the simple tools that enable us to do so are really falling away, and now we're looking at a whole new set of tools. It's like, it's like antibiotics, right? The drugs get resistant to the easy antibiotics, and so we've got to go to more and more powerful antibiotics. It's the same thing with attribution. So let's go and spend a bit of time talking about CCPA, and I wanted to do that just to get everybody aware that we're end of September really, and on Jan 1, 2020, CCPA is coming into effect, and it's real and it has bite. But as opposed to GDPR, where there's a lot of people going around saying the sky is falling, and we even know some organizations that went completely dark. Basically, if you were visiting their site from Europe, you saw nothing. It was completely dark. We don't think that level of hysteria is going to happen with CCPA. And one of the major reasons why that's the case is because as opposed to GDPR, which is opt-in, I have to explicitly give you the right to use my data. CCPA is an opt-out, which is I have the right to use your data unless you tell me otherwise. And so that's an extraordinarily critical point. It doesn't excuse, and we should never use that to do kind of all kinds of crazy stuff on the back end, but it's an opt-out versus an opt-in regime. Now, notice that the opt-out persists for just 1 year. In other words, you're going to have to make sure that people know about the opt-out on a year-over-year basis. And the other thing that's going to be interesting is this idea about not selling my data. So if you're collecting data about people and you're using it for your own purposes and only your own purposes, then CCPA is pretty easy and friendly. I won't say it's easy, but it's friendly to you. But if you're using data and also reselling that data or sharing that data to third parties, there's talk. There's a requirement to have this button which says "Do not share my data." So again, from us on the marketer side of the world, we really have to think very carefully about the data that we collect, the data that we own, and how and who we want to share that data with. Finally, there's a lot of unknowns about CCPA. There's no jurisprudence, just as was done for GDPR. But we're going to need to get some guidance on it. And I think, unfortunately, the only way we're going to get real guidance is when it's in place and things start to happen. But just to make sure that everybody's fully aware of it, opt-out versus opt-in, which really lowers the risk profile for most people. Now, if you think about that, right, if you think about what CCPA is a response to, as I said earlier on in the environmental scan, a lot of legislative actions that are going on in response to the perception that the people are using data inappropriately, and tech is using that, in particular Firefox and Apple, Mozilla and Apple are using that as an excuse perhaps, or as a reason to really tighten the hatches on what can be collected across their browsers. And of course, it serves Apple very well because Apple has an ecosystem which doesn't really rely on this, but it's hard for all of the rest of us. So what do we do? And at Kernel Path, the thing that we're talking a lot with our clients about is the concept that identity is really the new gold. Knowing who your customers are in an unambiguous way, or to the extent that you can, filling in the picture so you have a more rounded picture of those people, and having the consent attached to that, and having a value equation that enables you to collect progressively more information, and managing that well, to use that for marketing is really where things are going to be moving to. So let's kind of walk a little bit into this.
What's interesting here, I think, Alex, kind of piggybacking off of what you were just saying, we know that our customers, we want to know a lot about them. There have been CRM systems in place predating a lot of the digital ecosystem stuff that we're talking about here today. Knowing your customers, segmenting on them, being able to understand their lifetime value, all of those tools and processes have been in place for a long time. But in the digital space, if we have the CRM information completely separate from how our consumers are interacting in the digital space, that important link is not there. So encouraging customers to log in on the website, or having a good reason to, is critical to not only bridging that gap, but it also resolves some of this consent issues that Alex was just talking about. But it's future-proof, because once you know who your consumer is, and their email is going to change very infrequently, this is a great opportunity to get them to log in. And there's a lot of strategies that we can employ to do this. Obviously, couponing is probably one of the lowest hanging fruits. Now, of course, that's not going to apply to everybody who's here on the call today. Some businesses, that's not even an option. But you could put a coupon out there. You could so you have a very discreet and it's a value proposition that the customers are going to relate to, and it's going to be really easy for them to say, oh, okay, I give you something, I get something. All of that should be said that this all needs to be predicated on really good tech. So if I'm going to a website to sign up for a coupon and I have to fill out a form, that form better work. That form better pass the data properly, again, consent managed in a consent managed way, to the proper place, backend, safe house, wherever it's going to be, that we can access it later, that we can understand that consumer came to our website, provided us that consent. So those data linkages need to be there. And the experience for the consumer, again, going back to this theme of trust, it has to be a great experience, and it has to be really clear to the consumer what they're signing up for, why, what the value proposition is, and that really is going to be one of the biggest hurdles, I think, for most people, is what is a strong business-specific strategy that you can employ to ensure that consumers want to share this information with you, log in, and give you that critical email component that's going to be able for us to follow them not only through CRM, but in other avenues that we'll talk about coming up on upcoming slides.
Yeah, and I just want to kind of build on this a little bit more, Mary, and just say that one of the things that's clear is that, I'm sure many of you have gone to a website and you get you land on it, you get thrown up with a light box that says, subscribe to our newsletter. And, I always think that at least they should buy me a drink before they ask me for that. But, that's just a non-subtle, non-nuanced way of trying to get somebody to sign up. And we're not recommending that at all. What we're actually saying is that these are conversations. And the challenge is going to be, how do we deepen that conversation and exchange value to acquire information over time that's progressively richer for us, while always maintain the trust and always making sure that it's in the interests of the consumer that we're asking that. Because if that experience is holistic and thought through, we think that this is an easier lift. Because there are some entities and some, in fact, I wouldn't say some, there's probably most organizations, there's not really a compelling reason for you to have a logged in state. So that's where some of the hurdle comes from. And that's why we believe it might not necessarily be an easy lift. I think there's another thing that this also builds onto, Mary, and that is, used to be that clients would come to us and say, well, we're thinking about doing an app, and we'd have a really long, hard conversation about the business rationale for saying yes to that and investing. We now believe that that business rationale has gotten a great big boost because, of course, an app means you're on your device, your mobile device moves around with you, gives you lots of other signals which are very valuable for you as a marketer. It gives you another device. We know that e-commerce that's mobile is growing by leaps and bounds. So it's not, and it's also not as an elegant experience logging in on a mobile device as it is on a laptop or desktop. So the app becomes one of the ways that that can be improved. And the question becomes, how do you create an app with enough value inside of it that people want to download it and activate it and use it? So this is about thinking through business strategies. That's very little to do with cookies per se, but it's an outgrowth if you follow through what does this mean strategically for us as a business, and what do we need to be thinking about in order to not get spanked by the fact we're going to lose this way that we've been marketing and reaching people in the past.
And one more piggyback off your piggyback there, Alex, is
Yeah.
apps are great, to your point, but the consumer has to find value. Go back to that theme of trust, consumer trust, and giving them a really strong value proposition. You can't just be like, here's an app with some content that I'm never going to change and it's going to sit there for a year. Not a value proposition, and you might as well just throw it in the waste bin. So it has to have a long arc strategy there that you have to be aware of, and that great UX that you have to provide the consumer along the way. It's not a trivial task.
Not a trivial task at all. So if we continue on and we think about where that information gets collected, right? So I'm just back up and say it was a while ago that Adobe announced that it was doing a partnership with Microsoft, and as part of that partnership with Microsoft, they got access to Microsoft Dynamics, which is their CRM. They got access to LinkedIn, which is an incredible data set of business professionals. Really important because that is how we're going to manage identity and push that through the marketing suite. If we look at the Google side, Google announced, I think it's almost a couple of years ago now, a relationship with Salesforce, and now the native connectors are all there. But I think it's telling if you take a look at the Google marketing platforms kind of overall schematic here on the right-hand side, you'll notice that marketer data and client CRM are right on the upper left corner. We read from left to right, and it's no surprise for us that Google's put it here because this is, for us in our world, we believe it is the identity thing that's going to drive the whole MarTech stack. You can build and deploy tools like the marketing platform, Google Marketing Platform. The challenge is always going to be in the dotted lines. The dotted lines are where all the complexity lies. The dotted lines are what makes this whole thing work. The dotted lines are where data flows. And the flow of data, that data is an identity. And so we talk about this concept that you have these stacks, but the fuel that makes them go is going to be identity. And identity is going to be really housed and managed through CRM. And so, your cookieless world strategy has a logged in dimension to it. It's got an app dimension to it, and it sure as hell has a CRM dimension to it. And thinking that through and how that's going to feed this is going to be super important. And we're actually being told that it's going to be super important right here in this diagram that's part of Google's platform roadmap. So let's explore that just a little bit more, right? Mary mentioned that when people log in, they give you an email address. People don't tend to change their email address very much, and you might get some other PII as a result of that. That gives you the ability to attach that to a device ID. I have this email address, and that was given to me when somebody was on this device, so I can get that there. I may be able to get other second or third party attributes that I can attach to that through maybe perhaps some data broker. And because I've got first party data, I've got that attached to device ID, I've got some other attributes, I can now start to model, because the challenge for marketers isn't the people that I already know, it's the people that I don't know. I want to market to the ones that I don't know, but who are like the people that are currently buying from me. And that's this idea about the model prospect universe, is that if I have enough of my own data and I know about where the devices that data is attached to, and I have some other attributes that are important because they reflect the ideal consumer, then I can model that out. And when I model that out, I'd then like to be able to link that to publishers. So that's what we call the marketer graph. And if you take a look at the other side, the publishers who have the space that I want to buy ads on, they have something very similar to it. I'll just say this, is that the linkage between those two can be something like email. And in fact, this is the case with Google that has their customer match. If you load up an audience that you've identified and for which you have email addresses, if those email matches any of the ones within theirs with certain attributes, I can model that out and I can go and find new people on the other side. So the collection of this information is about being able to attach it to an ID related to a device and then build your own graph and then use that to expand that across the publishers. So really what we're looking at here, if you just, again, take a step back, is kind of this back to the future moment that we have right now. If, remember way back in the days when I started, we had, database marketing. And the idea was I'm buying addresses, I'm buying people that are attached to addresses which are in DMAs, and I've got some other demographic information that's associated, mostly tied to the DMA, and I'm going to send an email, or I'm going to do something that enables me to reach that person because I have a name and an address. And in today's world, we're now seeing those marketplaces. So that's a marketplace. We're seeing these addressable marketplaces like your home and your neighborhood. That's an addressable marketplace. The digital equivalent of an addressable marketplace is anybody that has a very large volume of logged in users. Think Netflix, think Uber, think Amazon, of course Google and Facebook, but anybody, Pinterest even, anybody that's got a large number of people that for which it has the email addresses and they're tied to devices, and I know that's across devices. So what's old is new again. We're now targeting people based on ID. And so who's ahead? Like who is right now at the front of this addressable marketplace? And the people who are at the front are those that have enabled a really cover the water of all of my devices. So my TV, my tablet, my phone, my laptop, my desktop at my dad's place or what have you. People that have really have this are the ones that have these must-have products and services, and the ubiquity of those services and the fact that I'm in some cases automatically logged into them means that they have an extraordinarily robust device graph, and they can reach me directly, and they can do that across all of these things. And they've got a lot of different signals that are coming in, and of course we've got new signals coming in from devices such as Alexa or Portal or Google Home. So what we're just trying to say here is that the proliferation of these must-have services has enabled these entities to create these extremely large marketplaces of addressable marketplaces, and with a lot of information, a lot of signals about people. And the net is that makes them extraordinarily attractive to us as marketers, right? It's these addressable marketplaces. We think there's going to be a lot of other addressable marketplaces, and that's what we're trying to tee up here. But the ones who are winning right now today are Google and Facebook. You're looking at a graph of digital advertising spending or revenue in the United States. This is U.S. specific, from 2018 to 2019. And again, just the top two, just Google and Facebook, are hoovering up about 60% of all of that spend. Notice that Amazon has had a pretty big jump between 2018 and 2019. And for those of you wondering why Verizon is over there, well, Verizon has got Oath. And Oath is basically a collection of what's Yahoo and a number of other entities, which is an addressable marketplace. And Verizon is getting into the game and saying, hey, we have a lot of people that you can target. We know a lot about them, and we'll enable you to reach and tap into that if you want to.
So where this leads us, and I think we wanted to kind of wrap up here with some actions that everyone can take to future-proof and ready yourself and your business. I mean, I think a lot of us are already doing this, but knowing your first-party data, making sure it's consent-proof, understanding who's signing in, logging in, signing up, and ensuring that data is seamlessly flowing from your digital properties to your CRM, and there's an even exchange of information across those platforms is key. Data flows are really important, going back to that slide Alex showed of the Google infrastructure. Everybody has your own, everybody on this call has your own business infrastructure with your data flows, and ensuring the first party piece is tight and readied for this future is essential. And that way you can actually, like Alex was describing, start to identify your own addressable marketing approach. You have this wealth of data about your customers today. Leverage it, look at it, model against it, use it to activate on platforms that you trust and that you can actually measure. And focus beyond that to the personalization. Personalization still exists. It's going to exist. We love personalization. It doesn't go away in this kind of nebulous, cookieless world. Personalization, as we saw it in the past, is going to change, but we want to make sure that we can start thinking forward to a new way towards optimization and measurement, and personalization is part of that conversation, because activating a personalized experience for your customers, again, in a more trustworthy flow where they feel good about consent, giving you their data and their information, is going to allow you to give them those personalized messages. So it's basically what we want to do today, but in the new paradigm where we kind of have to step back and start kind of at the beginning for some, or maybe some people on the phone are a little bit further ahead, but thinking about that first-party data linkage and focusing on your CRM platform as a way to start rebuilding.
Yeah, and again, what we want to say out here is we'll get to our next steps and specific things, but if you're not thinking about your own ID graph, if you're not thinking about how am I going to collect information specifically about users and create a kind of very subtle, nuanced, appropriate, experience-appropriate value exchange with your customers to collect progressively more amounts of information. I mean, you need to start thinking about that now. If you don't have the systems in place to manage that information on the back end, you have to think about that now. If you've been out there retargeting and being really successful at using retargeting, you need to think about that right now. The ability for us to do what we've done in the past and buy audiences based on cookies is disappearing. And in its place is going to come what we think is going to be something much better, which is using identity and working. And that's why we have build and partner, because there are some people out there right now, organizations out there that have solved for identity, and they are in the identity market space. So they are selling identity. And so one of the things is that we're kind of recommending to clients is you may or you should think about that, because it's not good enough to know the people that you know. It's about the people that you don't know that are like the people that you know, and that necessarily means looking at others that have that type of information that you could leverage. So that's what we're saying about going beyond. So let's wrap up with next steps.
I think we talked about the first-party data quite a bit, though. I like to bang that drum a lot. How is it being collected and managed? Do you have consent? Again, going back to that is foundational. That's element number one. And if first-party data is not being collected, start thinking about some of those strategies that you can propose. And again, your customers are going to be smart. They're going to sniff you out if you're just looking to throw something at them that's going to, they have to give you a bunch of information and there is not a strong value proposition there. So again, steeping this in really good strategy is quintessential, and understanding what those consumers want as that value proposition, critical. So, and then the good tech and the good usability that goes along with that. So going back to that theme again. Getting ready for the unconformity, the measure different message, and again, not meaning to be too Apple-esque with measure different, but it is really going to be, it's going to be a new world where we're not going to, it's almost like, as opposed to, we've always done top-down funnel measurement, I almost feel like it's going to be the opposite, where what do we know about the bottom of the funnel and how can we extrapolate those findings upward? And that kind of measure different idea. Maybe there's going to be some new metrics we want to invent, maybe some trust metrics rather than engagement metrics. In the whole world of, again, an attention-starved society, maybe high engagement isn't the best thing. Maybe we want them to get in, get out, have a seamless experience, and be happy with their interactions with our brand. So there's a lot of things that are kind of tipping on their head right now for, and again, to prepare your businesses for this shift starting now. I know, again, Alex, you couldn't be more right to this attachment we have to year-over-year, month-over-month, week-over-week reporting, and the fact that some of that is going to inevitably shift is something we can and should prepare ourselves for today. And then, go ahead. Sorry.
Sorry, I didn't interrupt you, but I was just going to say that it's, just give you a really small example. So we talked earlier on about top of funnel being really badly impacted by this, right? And the other thing is, if you're in a sector that has a long buying cycle, you're going to be really badly affected by this as well. So the shorter the buying cycle is, the better it's going to be for you. But it not only requires that we think different about measurement, we need to kind of go into our measurement data right away. So since we have historical data, we can look at what our historical data was. For example, in mobile traffic from Safari browsers, and we can do a year-over-year comparison of that, and that will quickly give us a sense of, wow, that's the impact right there, right? So we're recommending to clients to start looking at year-over-year data, mostly from the perspective of how things are shifting right now, so you can start to anticipate how that shift will continue going forward. Because if you've just been blindly buying media, if you've just been running your campaigns in the way that you have been in the past without understanding that, whole swaths of the tools that enable you to understand whether they're being effective or not are basically being knocked out from underneath you, you could have been spending money very badly for some time. So you don't want to continue doing that going forward. And that's a really, really core message that we're telling people. Go back, take a look at historicals, look at the days. Pay attention to mobile, pay attention to differences in Safari and Mozilla, because the two of them are kind of very close to lockstep behaviors, and understand what that means. And Mary mentioned earlier on about CPAs going way up on Chrome, because we're all now running to retarget to those people because we still can. And is that dollar really being any more effective, right? It's because you're now competing against so many other people. There's a lot of things that you need to pay attention to right now, because these effects are happening actually right now, in addition to the work that you have to do to think about tomorrow from a strategic perspective, to understand how am I going to orient the organization to be able to capture or create a logged-in state and capture a lot of first-party data. If I am not, and by that I mean identity data, unless I am making the decision to work with people that are already in the identity space, and so I can leverage their tools.